I hear a lot of scary shopping stories, and they are usually from the perspective of the person who is shopping. However, my scariest experience happened when I was working at a bookstore. About 2 months after I was promoted from bookseller to assistant manager, we were hit by the Christmas rush. It was always so overwhelming, and by the end of the night, everyone was so wiped out. On the nights that I was closing, I let the workers go as soon as they were done. There was no reason to make them stick around and be tired while I was finishing up my work. After I let everyone go, I went back in the office to do my work. After a while, I heard a knock at front door. We had security cameras, but there wasn't one at the door, so I had to go to the front and see who it was. There a guy stood, dressed in dark clothes, and had his hood up. I asked him how I could help him, of course watching him through the door.
Hey, dude, I left my wallet in your store.
He told me.
Can you open the door and let me come in and get it?
I asked him where he thought he left it and that I would look for it for him. He didn't like that idea and told me he wasn't sure. He had been shopping through the entire store and would have to look for it. I asked him if he had bought anything and he told me yes, which meant he had to have his wallet on him at that point. I pointed that out to him and he seemed taken back a bit. I told him we didn't get anything turned in, but I could take his information and get back to him if we find anything. The man began getting angry, telling me that he needed his wallet tonight, and he couldn't wait for me to look for it. He kept insisting that I let him in so he could look for it. When I told him that there was no way I was letting him in the store after hours, he began getting visibly angry. He told me that if I didn't let him in, he would call the police and tell them that I stole his wallet. He even got his cell phone out of his pocket and acted like he was going to call. At that point, I had had enough. I told the guy the best I could do for him is take his information and call him if anything was found. I then told him that if this wasn't good enough, then there wasn't anything at all that I could do for him. He got really angry and began swearing at me. He grabbed the door and began shaking it, demanding that I open the door. I told him I was going to walk over to the customer service desk and call the police. I wasn't willing to cooperate anymore. As I made my way over there, I noticed the guy take off down the street. I thought that was the end of him, and I figured that I didn't really need to bother the police for this. I went back to my work and tried my best to get it done so I could go home and get some rest. I hadn't heard any other knocks and figured that I wouldn't be seeing that guy again. However, when I was going to the front of the store, I did look around to see if anyone was in the parking lot before I went outside. I went out to my car and couldn't wait to get out of the cold since it had been snowing. However, I froze when I was maybe within a couple feet away from my car. There was someone in the back seat of my car. He was hiding down on the back seat with his hood over his head, but there was definitely someone in the back seat of my car and I knew exactly who it had to be. Furthermore, he must have seen me or he wouldn't have ducked down. I did the only thing I could think of to do. I turned and ran at full speed back to the store. I didn't look back around until I had made it to the door. And yeah, he was coming at me. I unlocked the door and shut it behind me. He made it to the door right before I could lock it, so I had to do my best to hold it closed while trying to turn the lock. As I did, the man screamed all sorts of obscenities at me, telling me he was going to kill me. As the door opened outward, I quickly pushed it toward him, knocking him on the ground. Before he could realize what had happened and recover, I was able to get the door closed and locked. I immediately called the police. The guy left after the door was locked, but the police picked him up pretty quickly. Normally, I don't go out Christmas shopping on Black Friday. It sometimes seems that more negativity comes out of it than anything. I did go out on Black Friday once, and honestly, the experience kept me from ever even considering doing it again. This was a few years back. The big Christmas gift that year was a game called Uno Attack. It was supposed to sell out pretty quickly, and my nephew really wanted one. So I decided for the first time ever to brave the Black Friday crowd and see about getting one. I waited outside the store in line for it to open. The entire time I kept wondering why people were so fanatical about doing this. It was cold. And although I was reasonably bundled up, it didn't help that I had to spend so much time not moving. In addition, people were in terrible spirits, which seemed to take the spirit away from the event. Some people would try to cut in line, which only made the people already in line crabbier than they were. When the store was getting closer to opening, I noticed that there was someone from the store headed out and talking to each person in line. When they got to me, I realized he was handing out tickets, indicating who would be able to buy an Uno attack game. He asked me if that was why I was there, and I told him yes. He told me I was lucky then because I was getting the very last ticket. Of course, this caused some groaning and swearing from the people behind me. Although I hated the idea that there would be a lot of children who wouldn't be getting the toy they wanted, I was elated. That was until this guy got out of line and walked up to me. He came up immediately after the worker left. He first offered to buy the ticket from me. I told him no, because it wasn't a matter of money. It was me trying to make my nephew happy. He then started telling me that his son really wanted the toy. I countered with letting him know that my nephew also really wanted the toy. When I kept refusing, he started telling me other stories, such as his son was really sick, but I could tell he was just doing his best to make me feel guilty. From further back in the line, a few other people began telling the guy to leave me alone. He got into a shouting match with several of them. Eventually the guy stomped away, but not before telling me, "I'll get that toy." I tried not to think about it. I went in, claimed the Uno game, and did some more shopping. I figured that since I had spent so much time outside waiting, that I should try to get as much done as I could. When I was done in that store, I went back out to my car. I put all the toys in the trunk, and then I walked over to the bookstore in the strip mall in order to get some other items. When I began walking back to the car the second time, I paused when I noticed the man from earlier was leaning on my car. I began feeling tense, knowing that the guy was going to confront me again. He was much bigger than I was, but I decided I couldn't let him intimidate me. As I got closer to my car, he noticed me and he smiled. He reached into his pocket, and I assumed he was reaching for his wallet, but it only took a moment before I saw that it was a pocket knife, and he flipped it open. I immediately stopped. I couldn't imagine the guy would be stupid enough to try and threaten or stab me in a busy parking lot. But I didn't want to test that theory, so I turned and quickly ran back into the store that I had bought the Uno game in. I let the store security know what happened, and they gave me an escort out to the car. The man was gone. I was more shaken when I noticed knife marks on the lock for my trunk, and the trunk was dented. There were also deep scratches in my driver's side window. I never went out on Black Friday again. I was about 16. It was Christmas Eve and snowing heavily. My parents and myself were sitting in the living room with the Christmas tree lights on, having eggnog and opening up my stocking gifts, as was our tradition. We suddenly heard the door knocker banging really loudly 3 times. We saw Noon out the window, but my dad opened up the door and looked down. There on the front porch was a bloody black cat lying across the threshold across the snow. What was really strange, though, was there was no human footprints in the snow on the steps, just the cat. But there weren't even paw prints from that. No tire tracks, and logistically, there was nowhere and no way that we would have not seen anyone if they put the cat there. It was still alive and crying slightly. My dad called to us to grab a towel that we could use to wrap it up in. He gently picked it up and brought it inside, despite the weird events. It was a young male that was not fixed and had been in a terrible fight. A few days later, we took it to a vet, and he recovered nicely. After he had fully recovered from his injuries, my mom gave it to a friend of ours that lived down the street. About 4 or 5 months later, they ended up telling us about an event also involving that cat. The cat, now happily part of the family, woke them all up one night by howling and screaming, just absolutely beside himself. Turns out an electrical fire had started in the garage, and one of the cars was also on fire. They all woke up, everyone was okay, and the car didn't blow up, and only the garage was damaged. But they were very lucky in general, but especially because there was all kinds of flammable stuff in the garage. Initially, they called him something pretty generic like Shadow, but then they renamed him Clark after Superman. He was a really nice cat and lived to be pretty old.